Welcome back to another Friday Breaking the Silence live stream. We have Joe Stillwell, who I know you're all familiar with because he literally has thousands and thousands and thousands of views on his amazing experience. I've been a bit quiet lately because I've been working very hard ever since Ann Carter visited last week and Judy Goldschmidt. Because we shot both of them in studio to talk about their involvement on all of this. And Anne did a short piece, and Judy did a long one. And we're going to let it be long this time. It's going to be about an hour long and very cinematic. Probably the most cinematic thing we've done. Oh, thank you, Alchemist. Thank you very much. Thank you. Happy Friday to you, too. And some of you may not know what I'm talking about, but here's the poster that I made. We have a trailer coming for it next week because this one, I'm doing things I've never been able to do before. If you watched the intro, you'll see all kinds of artwork and pictures. Most of those are from the 90s, working with Whitley Strieber on the NBC's 2-hour special Confirmation, which was a horrible experience, and many other things. I've been doing this for a long time, but finally, at this point, CGI, not AI, CGI has got to a point now where I can sculpt and bring these beings to life like I never could before, whether in sculpture or rubber puppets or paintings. It's just amazing. So, and I underline no AI. AI is a totally different thing. What I'm doing is I'm handcrafting everything and hand doing all the effects. I'm not just telling some computer what I want, and getting something that really doesn't hone up to it. So let me remove this and let me bring Joe Stillwell on. Hi, Joe. So nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you again.
Do you have the comments on? Because, people will be wanting to talk to you because we haven't talked to you on this show since we did your 4-part series. And I thought it might be great to talk about how you feel about all this and what you think might be the reasons for why this is happening. If you've kept up with me at all and some of the people here, you know what we've been thinking lately. And Judy really goes into this in her hour-long show, which will be out in a few weeks. But I'd just be really curious to see what you think, see what you feel, why you think this happened to you, and why you think it's happening to us. What's its purpose? Gotcha.
Oh boy. I believe it's happening to me because I believe it happened to my father. I have heard over time that many people in the UFO community believe that these visits are familial. They follow each successive generation of a particular family. I don't know that that's true, but I believe in my case that probably is the best explanation that I can come up with. My father mentioned only once to me that he had had some unusual occurrences with Foo Fighters when he was involved in the Korean conflict in the 50s, late 40s and 50s. Beyond that, he never spoke to me about things that happened to him during the war, other than a few humorous asides during combat. But that was an unusual subject that he brought up one day, just out of the blue. And
That's your book, the name of your book?
It's close. The book is Into the Blue.
Oh, Into the Blue. Okay.
But yeah, I believe this has happened to me because it happened to him. I don't understand why that continuation would be present, but it's my understanding that I'm not the only one that believes this type of connection.
So, have you had any other interactions since we last spoke?
No. Everything that I talked about last time, and another story that we didn't get to that occurred in 1969, those are the only things, those are the only really significant encounters that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the 2011 encounters, which I discussed last time, those were the last encounters where I actually had a physical presence in my room with me. However, for 7 years following the encounters in 2011, I had unusual occurrences in my room often. They involved lights flashing throughout the room, electrical equipment turning on.
What about there wasn't there a crystal?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That was actually the last unusual occurrence that happened.
The
I'm
pineapple,
sorry,
crystal pineapple.
Yes, very good memory. Yes.
Well, you don't tend to forget things like that. And, that when you described it to me, I could really see it. It was just a beautiful thing.
It was. What was unusual about that, and very briefly, I'll describe what happened. I was in the process of writing my book. I had finished the manuscript and was just reviewing it one evening. This occurred about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was still daytime. And I was at my desk and I was reviewing the manuscript on the screen, and something appeared on the floor to the left of me, just about 2 feet to my left on the floor. And initially, as I was reading and this thing appeared, I thought it was a reflection, possibly from the light on the computer screen hitting my glasses in an unusual way and causing this ghost image to the left. So I ignored it. But it was very prominent and easy to see out of the periphery of my eyesight. And it went away. It disappeared. And I continued reading, and a few seconds passed, and it returned. And this time, it caught my attention more. I recognized the fact that it was gone and then back. It most likely was not a reflection because I was turning no lights on and off in the room. And it went off. It went away again. And then a few seconds went by and it reappeared. At this point, I understood that something was in the room. Something was appearing in the room. And I turned to look at it, and it disappeared. Now, what I turned to look at, and what I was seeing out of my peripheral vision, there was something on the floor. The total height of this thing was maybe 18 inches, somewhere around there, 18 to 20 inches tall.
Mhm.
The main body of it looked shaped like a pineapple, um, but it appeared to be made of glass. It was crystal clear, and it was covered with spikes. My recollection is they were three-sided, like a prism would be, um, and they came to a point. These spikes were all about 6 inches long, 5 or 6 inches long, and they covered this um, interior structure that was shaped kind of like a pineapple. Everything that I've described looked like glass, like crystal glass. It was just beautiful. And not only did it look like glass, but it had it was lit dimly. It had a white glow to it. It wasn't radiating. It wasn't casting off light. It was just illuminated dimly, sitting on the floor to my left. When I turned to look at it and it disappeared, that surprised me. So I turned back to the computer screen, continued to read my manuscript, and it reappeared. I turned again to my left to look at it, and it disappeared. At that point, I recognized that this thing could tell when I was trying to look directly at it. So it seemed to me to be sentient. So I turned back to the screen and continued reading. And my wife was across the hall in the other room at her office. And I called to her. I told her to come to the door of her office, but don't come into my room. And she did. She came to the door of her room. And I said, just stop right there. Something keeps appearing on the floor next to me, to my left. It's just under 2 feet tall. It looks like glass. It's covered with spikes. I just want you to stand there. I'm not going to look because it disappears when I look. And I want to see if it comes back so that you can tell me what exactly it is. And she stood there for about 60 seconds and it did not reappear. So I said, thank you. You can go back to working at your desk. And she did. And about 15 seconds after she walked away, it reappeared.
Of course.
Uh,
Yep.
I did not try to look at it again. I just wanted to see how long it would remain. And it remained for, I don't know, several seconds and then disappeared. And it did not reappear. Now, that was on a Monday afternoon when that occurred. The next day, Tuesday, about the same time of day, I was again reviewing my manuscript. And nothing unusual happened that evening while I was reviewing the manuscript. The following day, Wednesday, about 6 o'clock at night, same thing. I was looking at the screen, reviewing my writing, and it reappeared. This time, it was there, stayed on for the same amount of time that it did the first night on the Monday. It went away and then came back and went away, and it did not reappear. And it never has come back since. I cannot imagine what that was. I have never seen anything ever like that. It was so unusual. And it obviously had an awareness that I was trying to look directly at it. And when that happened,
Right.
it would disappear.
Did you get any sense of did you get any feeling or sense from it? of consciousness or what it might possibly be? Was it connected to your other experiences? I get the feeling it was.
I can't imagine what it was.
Yeah.
It looked like nothing that I have ever seen in my life,
Well, so much of it.
but it obviously was reacting to me trying to look directly at it.
Right.
So I have no guess what that was.
It makes me wonder that, because of the very strong and powerful presence that you experienced, you know, did they leave something behind to kind of keep an eye on you with, or, I mean, not anything evil or bad, but just they're curious.
Uh, this occurred. This thing on the floor occurred several years after the 2011 experiences.
Right.
And as I said, all the way up to 2018, I was having unusual things periodically happen in the
Right.
room. This occurred after 2018. So that was the last unusual thing that occurred in my room. And nothing since has occurred that I would connect to these really unusual experiences.
Now, the story that you didn't share in the 4 shows that we did, is that something you could share with us now? I remember you talked about it a bit to me when you were here at the studio, and I remember you were on a highway.
Yes, yes. Certainly, I'd love to share that story.
Okay.
Can I first acknowledge I'm as I'm talking, I'm looking at some of these comments, and for all of you, they're being so positive about listening to what I have to say. Thank you so much for these positive comments. It really encourages me to keep trying to have people hear about these things and know that this is real, and your support it really means a lot. Thank you so much to all of you. The story that Steve is referencing, this occurred in 1969. It's very lengthy. I'll just give a synopsis. I'll be more brief.
Well, you've got time. This is
Okay.
an hour-long show, and we're only 17 minutes in, so
Okay.
go
In
ahead.
1969, I had a swing shift job at a local aircraft manufacturing company. I got off at 2 o'clock, or I'm sorry, I got off at 11 o'clock at night, went to work at 2 o'clock. And this occurred on February 22nd, 1969. I had gotten home from work, had loaded up my car with snow skiing equipment, and picked up a female friend of mine. We were going to drive through the night to go snow skiing at Mammoth Mountain, which is a Central California ski resort. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that.
Oh, yeah.
And from where I lived in Orange County in Southern California, it was about an 8-hour drive. Back then, we were young enough that we, for some reason, would spend 8 hours driving just to have a day's worth of skiing. I certainly wouldn't do that today, but we got in the car and off we went. We left around midnight and managed to get through LA after about an hour's drive. And at that point, my friend fell asleep. We were in a Volkswagen Bug. So it was a
Good car.
very small car. I had owned a couple of them back then. So she was asleep and I was just driving through the night. And we were on Route 395. It's a very dark highway. And way back then, there were 2 lanes running north a very wide dirt median, and then 2 lanes running back south. We were heading north. I had driven a couple of hours, and just in the darkness of the desert, pitch black, no moonlight, and suddenly in the distance, in the dimly lit distance of my headlights, there appeared to be someone standing on the right side of the road. They were not on the road, but they were facing the road. So as I approached, I was looking at the left side of this thing, and its toes appeared to be touching the pavement edge. It was standing just off the asphalt on the gravel surface of the dirt and desert floor. It was solid white and looked like a mummy. It was standing upright, arms at its sides, and it was completely wrapped from head to toe in raggedly torn strips of what appeared to be cloth, maybe about 2 or 3 inches wide. It was completely covered. Its head was covered. Its arms were wrapped independently, but they were hanging at its sides, and its legs were wrapped independently. The other feature that was so noticeable was it seemed to have really large boots on, very, very large feet, very big boot-like things on its feet. As I got nearer, my headlights illuminated this thing completely, so it was very easy to see. I was in the right lane of the highway, so I was going to pass this thing literally within a foot or two to the right side of the car. It never moved. Because its face was facing the center of the road, as I approached, my light was coming from its left side, and I could see that its mouth was open. It was shadowed from my lights, and the wrap kind of was sucked down into the mouth, and that area was shadowed. Where the wrap covered the eyes, those were also kind of sunken in, and those were shadowed dark also. So the mouth and 2 eye areas were sunken in and darkened. Where the nose was, that protruded under the wrap. On the head, above the eye hollows, there was a circular structure around the head. It was also wrapped completely in this ragged cloth-like stuff. It looked like the brim of a hat. I sped past this thing, watching as it came by the car, and then looked in the rearview mirror as it disappeared into the darkness behind the car. I looked back forward. My passenger was still asleep. I looked back forward, and far ahead, in the dimly lit distance ahead, there was another one of these things at the right of the road, and it looked identical to the one I had just passed. And I estimate the distance between these two to be about 200 feet. As I approached, this one became more clear to me. And again, it was a twin of the one I had just passed. It never moved. And I sped past this thing also. Now, I have to say, at this point, to me, this is unusual behavior. Because where I was, and there were no other cars, there was no traffic at all, I would think that at this point I would pull over and get out of the car and see if this person needed help. Why are they here? But again, their appearance was so dramatically different. Maybe that's what prevented me from stopping. I mean, they almost looked monstrous. They were big. They were as large as a big man. So I passed the second one, watched it in the rearview mirror as it disappeared into the darkness also. As I looked back forward, the car the road had a slight incline to it. And as I looked back forward, I reached the top of this slight rise in the road. So my headlights were pointing into the sky. I was on a hump of a road. And because there was no moisture, I mean, it was just the middle of the night in this dark desert setting. The lights weren't really, you really couldn't see the beams of the headlight. There was no moisture in the air to reflect the beams. So it was just pitch blackness. And just as I crested that high part of the road, there was, I mean, just without warning, there was this just awful impact. I mean, just violent impact. I mean, the car just shook. I was just crumpled, just helplessly crumpled into my seat. And the car, I mean, it was just so violent. The car seemed to come off the road. And I was blinded. I remember there was a scream, and I believe it was me.
Mm.
And I also remember just an instant. I have just an instant memory where I was floating in the car. I was up against the ceiling, kind of laid out sideways. And I remember in that instant of realization that I was in the air, my thought was, I'm going to hurt her, because I thought I was going to fall down on top of my friend, my female friend. I don't like speculating, but I will speculate.
Okay, that's fine.
I will speculate on what I think, because I've had all these years to think about this.
Yeah.
What I think happened. I believe that the car was being tracked by an airborne craft. I believe it was above us. I believe the two mummy-like figures at the side of the road were produced by that craft. I don't know what the purpose of that would have been. But I believe the impact was that craft directing a beam of light that struck the car. And that violent impact was the force of that light. I believe the car did come off the road. And I believe me being up out of my seat, floating up in the car, was part of that weightless occurrence, where not only was the car coming off the road and going up, but so was I, one of the occupants. I will describe what happened next, but
okay. You said you were blinded. Was it very bright?
No, I actually was physically blinded.
Okay.
When that impact occurred, everything that I was seeing spiraled into a vortex. it was like everything, I don't know how to describe it. It was like if I wanted to blur an image, uh, but instead of pixelating it, I somehow
Hmm.
made it a swirl because there were still colors. There were still, it, it just distorted. When I say I was blinded, I could still see something, but it was completely distorted in a vortex.
Wow.
Um, so it was a very unusual thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the scream was from the impact. I think the impact was so dramatic that it knocked the wind out of me, and
Very startling.
I think that was an involuntary
Yeah.
scream from all of the air coming out of me. Uh, I believe we were lifted. I believe we were taken on to with the car with us inside, was taken on to that craft that was above us, that I'm speculating was above us, that I'm speculating directed a beam of light toward us. Because this is what happened next. I regained my vision. It didn't seem like a very long time went by, and I could now see. And everything was blue, beautiful blue. And I was in a street. To the right of me was a sidewalk. There were about 100 people, adults and humans, on the sidewalk, as if it was a crowd watching a parade. They were all looking toward me in the middle of the street, some sitting, some standing. They were all pure white. Behind them was a facade of buildings, as we would imagine um, a city street. And I do recall that the street where these people were standing, the furthest one away from me, was on a corner. There was a street that ran off to the right, and across that street there were buildings, um, and I could see straight ahead on the street that I was on. And the one thing that I do remember, I've never forgotten this, there were wires overhead, a lot of wires overhead of these streets, um, similar to how old streetcars were powered by electricity, by those wands that come up out of the top of
Hmm.
the cars.
Very
Um,
familiar.
so it was a street setting, a city street setting. Everything was blue except for the people, and the people were moving. Um, I remember that scene very well, and it seemed to be with me for, um, I'll say, at least a minute. It was quite a long time. Uh, and then my next realization is uh, I am on a two-lane road. It is dark. Everything is blue, this beautiful blue. And on either side of this road, toes against the surface of the road, facing the center, just like those mummies had been, there is a line of people. There are 6 to 8 to the right, and there are 6 to 8 to the left. They are standing facing the center of the road, about 40 or so feet apart, shoulder to shoulder. And they are all visible, not because of the headlights of my car, but because of this blue light that we are in. Everything is blue. The landscape is blue. Um, there's just this blue light illuminating everything. Um, I recall the the first one of these figures to the left. I I don't recall all the detail, but there was something gray right next to me, right at my shoulder. That's all I remember is gray. And then on ahead, again to the left, there were two mummy-looking figures.
Hmm.
They were, I don't know, maybe 25 feet ahead of, they appeared to be 25 feet or so ahead of where I was. And they were wrapped like the initial mummy-looking figures were, but these two, they look kind of like jellyfish. They were transparent, well, like a jellyfish. I mean, I could, they were clear.
Mm-hmm.
I could see blue. Parts of them were blue, and they were moving really strangely. They were moving like if you've ever driven past a parking lot of a car dealership, and they have those blowers sitting on the ground with these sock figures.
Yes.
Sticking
Mm-hmm.
up. Those figures.
Yeah, those things always bother me.
those sock figures blow. They're really big.
Yeah,
they're
disturbing.
These. That's the only thing I can compare these two mummies to. They were moving like that, very quickly and bending and just flying all over the place, but they were stuck to the ground. My next realization is, I'll assume it's the second character to the left, and this one looked like a cartoon. It was very, very big, but it was outlined in light, and it was wearing a cowboy hat that was outlined in light,
Mm-hmm.
and it was holding a lariat in one of its hands and spinning that lariat over its head. I only remember this figure from the waist up, and it just looked like a drawing made of light. It was not filled in. It was just a face and a torso. I could see the ribs, and they were lit. And then the outline of the body was lit, and then the eyes and the face and this hat were all lit. I don't know how long I was looking at that thing. And I now recognize that there are cars. I'm in a traffic jam, and these cars stretch away in front of me they're just to the horizon. And I look in the rearview mirror, and there are cars that I can see back as far as the blue light goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't understand where all of these cars originated. I don't understand why I'm in traffic. And I'm just very confused.
Well, sure.
Because there were no other cars on the road. I was the only one. My next realization is, again, it's just nothing but cars, but now there are buildings on both sides of the road. And I am in a city. Everything is blue. And up ahead to the left, I can see the Empire State Building. I am on a main thoroughfare. I've never been to New York City or the state of New York, but I am in New York City, and I can see the Empire State Building up ahead. I can see it all the way to the top. Now, I don't know how far back I would have to be on a road to be able to see the whole thing, but it's all blue. Everything is blue, and I am stuck. I'm just stopped looking at this. That doesn't seem to last very long. And I now realize that I'm in my car and I am slumped forward. I can't move. And I can see the lower corner of the driver's door, and it's open. I haven't stopped the car that I remember, and I certainly haven't opened the door. And it's incredibly bright. It's just bright. Everything seems to be white around me. That gray thing is right next to me in the open doorway. I can't see it because I I think my head is against the steering wheel. I'm slumped forward. And I can see the floor of the car. I can see the door is open, and I cannot move. And I can see this gray thing next to me. Now, as I have thought about this, I believe this is the craft into which the car and I were raised up into. I believe that the traffic that I thought that I was in, the view of downtown New York, I believe those were all telepathically inserted in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the motive, and this I will talk about later, but I believe the
Sure.
motive was to try to pacify me,
Mm-hmm.
to give me something familiar in my head so that I would not resist what was happening to me. And at this moment where I see the floor of the car in my open doorway, I have a realization that something is wrong. So for some reason, what I believe were thoughts to try to prevent me from resisting, those have worn off. And I am aware now that I'm in an odd place, and this is not right. I'm just looking at that view that I described. I can see out of the periphery, out the open car door, I can see that the floor is white. It doesn't look like the road. And I can see some things that look like wires or, I don't know, some stands, some metal structures, small metal structures. And at some point, I am sitting up. And I don't know how I got sitting up, but I can see that the interior of the car, it looks like it's foggy. The car was a dark navy blue and it had white interior. Now, on that year of Volkswagen, it had padding on the dashboard, but the dashboards were made of steel.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm very familiar with the car.
Yeah. But everything appeared to be bleached. The color didn't look right. It looked like I was in a fog, but I was still in the car. And then my next realization is I'm in a fight. I don't know what I am fighting, but I am fighting wildly. I am throwing. I'm throwing my arms and my fists, and I'm growling very loudly. I mean, thinking back on it, it was really quite a dramatic moment. And I do remember trying to hit whatever I was trying to hit. I hit where the windshield meets. There's a metal frame around. It's actually part of the interior of the car between the window and the headliner. There's a metal piece that's about 5 inches wide or so.
Yeah.
And I remember hitting right where the glass meets that metal. Um, and the reason I hit part of the car, these old Volkswagens were very tiny cars. I was sitting in it. The steering wheels were quite large, so I'm
Oh,
in a
yeah.
very confined space. It's not a good place to be fighting.
To be swinging, yeah.
And I only remember that. And then my next realization is I'm slumped forward against the steering wheel, looking at the brightly lit floor of the car with the open door. And my memory of that particular environment ends right there. My next realization is what I believe was the next figure along the road and to the left of the car. And this one was a female, a young, attractive female. She was in a dress reminiscent of the Victorian era. I won't describe all of her clothing, but the one feature that was so prominent, she was wearing one of those hats that has those very, very broad brims that just kind of
Hmm.
droops down. And it obscured a part of the left side of her face. And I remember she was only about 6 feet in front of me. And she was looking around from left to right as if she was looking for something. But she would periodically stop and look straight at me. And she was smiling. And then the next thing I realize, I am rising up from in front of her. I'm coming up off of, I don't think I was in my car. I think I was outside of my car. And I'm coming up off the ground and floating away from her. And I remember I was looking down at her and she was looking back up at me. This woman appeared in every aspect except for color to be an adult human woman.
Hmm.
However, she was not blue. Everything was blue. This beautiful blue light was just covering everything. But she presented in a muted brown color in this light. Then at some point, I am in the car again, and we are not on the right lane of the road where I should be. We're on the shoulder on the left side, and the car is facing the wrong way. And to the left of the car, I seem to be in a small turnout, and to the left of the car, the lower section of a hillside has been cut away. So I'm in this cut, and the cut is just as high as the top of the car. And I remember looking to my left, and this dirt wall was literally only about a foot away. And I recognized that I wouldn't be able to open the door of my car and get out. And the top of the cut had grass and weeds on it, and I could see the mountain. There was a mountain rising up from where I was. The car engine was turned off, and I was just sitting in the car. I had no awareness of my passenger. I don't know if she was in the car or not. And ahead of me, to the right ahead of me, just ahead of the car, at the near edge of the road, there were 5 or 6 humanoid figures facing the center of the road. So they had their right sides and back to where I was. And all of them looked identical, and they all looked like mummies. They were all wrapped in ragged strips of material from head to toe, completely covered. And they were standing upright with their arms at their sides, motionless. At some point, the one that was nearest to the car turned and started walking directly toward me, looking right at me. It moved incredibly slow. I mean, in ultra slow motion. And I just looked at it as it approached me. And I had no concern, I had no fear. My only realization was I was sitting in my car. That was all that I knew at that moment. I don't have any recollection of that thing reaching my position.
Mm-hmm.
And then my next realization is I am moving up from the ground. I am face down, moving up from the ground. I think I was in a prone position. Everything is blue. It's the side of a mountain. It's covered with loose rocks of varying sizes. Some are very large, some are smaller. Lit beautifully blue, casting very dark black shadows. And I am moving up away from the surface. And I get higher and higher, and eventually I am several hundred feet up above this rocky mountainside. And I can see all of this. I can't move. I can't move my eyes to look around, but I can see all of this in my field of view. And this mountain sloped down to my right and down to under where I was in the sky. The odd thing about this view was in my periphery, there was it was black, as if you look out a window and then step back just enough so that you can see the sides of the window, but it's dark. If you're in a dark room looking out at something that's lit,
Mm-hmm.
and you step back from the window just so you can see that shape of the window, that's what it appeared to be. I just remember it was black all the way around what I was seeing. My next realization is I'm in my car. We're driving down the road, and there are two figures up to the left. They are attached to each other. The one furthest from the road appears to be a female. The one nearest the road appears to be a child size. They are attached at the ends of their arms, I'll just refer to it as their hands. And everything else is blue. Everything is blue except for straight ahead of the car. And straight ahead of me, there is a square, jet black opening in this blue that I'm in. And I recognize that as the dark of the desert through which I'm driving. And the square was small. It was only as big as the profile of my car. And I remember as I approached it, I didn't think I would be able to fit through. Now, again, obviously, this is not rational thought, because I don't have to fit through anything to drive through light. Light is just light. But my thought was I need to go through this black hole of this blue light. And these two figures were standing right at the edge of that black square. And just as I got to it, where the car was going to go out into the black, this smaller figure was pulling against the larger figure. And just as I got to that point, the smaller figure pulled away from the big one and jumped to right in front of the car. And I gripped the steering wheel hard and started to duck my head because in a split second, I was going to hit this thing. And I did. Before I could get my head ducked and my eyes closed, I hit this small figure and it exploded into a very thick, viscous splash of white stuff. And that transitioned almost immediately into white brilliance. Everything in my field of view just went blinding white. Still braced against the steering wheel with my head ducked and my eyes closed, waiting for the impact, and it never came. So I raised my head up and looked out forward through the windshield, and the car was moving along on the right lane of a divided highway at full speed. It was as if nothing had happened. So I continued driving, but I remember so clearly that at this point I was terrified and I was looking all around in terror. My head movement was like in a cartoon where you're just looking all over the place, trying to see everywhere at once. And I recognized that there was something that was coming for us. Whatever had just happened, they're coming. And I was obviously trying to somehow foresee that and avoid it. And then up ahead, here again, in the total darkness of night, with no moon, in the very, very faint distance lit by my headlights, there appears to be a cliff right across the road. And I could see on the road as I approached, it was just a perfectly straight line, perfectly straight across the road with a vertical black face ascendant from that boundary. It looked like the road just drove right into a cliff. So I got on the brakes really quickly. I started to downshift to stop because the headlights on those Volkswagens didn't illuminate very far in front.
No.
I was going to hit this cliff pretty quickly if I didn't stop fast. Then I got the car slowed. And as I got closer, it became more clear. This was a perfectly flat, glass-like surface, perfectly vertical, and it extended to the right and left and upward out of my headlight view. So I couldn't see how large this was. But again, obviously, I'm not thinking correctly because I had driven this road scores of times in previous winters. I knew this road very well. But in that moment, it was my belief that there had been a road built to drive cars directly into a cliff. And I couldn't understand that. I was confused by that. So I had the car going very slowly, and I kept driving toward this cliff, and I drove right into it. I drove the car right into it. And it was not flexible, and it stopped the car with a thud. I am now right up against the face of this thing, so the headlights are only illuminating this small arc of this cliff right in front of me. I put the car in neutral, I pulled up the emergency brake, and I was trying to look at this thing. I was looking out through the windshield, trying to figure out what this thing was. And I determined that I'm going to have to get out of the car. I cannot see. So I did. I opened the door. I stepped out of the car. And I put my left hand on the top of the door frame. I put my right hand on the top of the car. And I looked up to try to see the top of this thing, and I could. I looked to the right to try to see how far this cliff extended, and I could see the end. This thing was about 3 stories tall, and to the right, it went off the road out onto the desert floor. But it was only out maybe 30 or 40 feet out onto the desert. So I could see what this thing was. I left the safety of the car door and stepped forward and walked right up to this cliff. And I literally almost walked up where I was leaning against it, where I was touching it. And I remember moving my head forward to where my face is almost against the surface. And I brought my right hand up and I tapped. And I remember that I remember the noise it made. It was hard. And it was cold. And it confused me that a cliff would have such an artificial appearance. I mean, it looked like a sheet of glass. I turned to the right to look into that arc of light that was being cast by the headlights of the car. And I was just staring at the lit portion of this cliff. And a thought entered my mind. And this is not a thought that I would have at that moment. And I believe, once again, this was a telepathic thought that was inserted. And the thought was, there is a waterfall about to cascade from the top of this cliff of a size and volume that is not survivable. And it's going to land on me, and it's going to land on the car. I need to move. I need to get out of here. So I did. I turned. I didn't run, or I wasn't panicked, but I knew this waterfall was coming. And I turned, walked back to the car door, got in the car, put the car in reverse. I backed up. I turned right and drove off the road out into the desert with this wall now to my left. My thought was that this wall was like a sheet of glass. I'm going to go to the end of it, which I could see, and I'm going to make a U-turn around it and drive back to the road, get back on the road, and continue to our destination. And again, that is obviously not a rational thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I did. I drove very slowly out onto the desert, and I was right up against this thing. I could, if I had rolled my window down, I could have reached out and touched it and dragged my hand along, but I did not. I got to the end of it, and I had to turn left. And as I turned left, the headlights now were no longer against the lower, illuminating the lower part of this wall. It was only a small strip of the desert in front of me that was illuminated. And I remember in that moment, as the car swept around, the headlights swept around as I turned the car. I remember at that moment feeling, I don't know if anyone's ever felt lost or been lost, but it's an odd feeling. It's a very odd feeling.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I felt lost. I did not know where I was. Nothing was familiar. I was out in the desert. The road was gone. I seemed to be alone. It was a very odd feeling. So I turned to make a U-turn, and as the headlights came around, there was another wall attached to the first one, running perpendicular to it. So this thing had a corner on it. This cliff had a corner. Again, this didn't strike me as unusual. I just thought, okay, this cliff just continues. So I started driving along that side. again, very slowly, and right up against it. And I did not get very far. My next realization is I'm standing in the desert, and I'm facing the wall, the cliff. I'm not in my car. I'm standing. I don't know where my car is, but I'm facing this cliff. I seem to be maybe about 30 feet out away from it. And I can't move, but I can see. I'm standing upright and I can see, but I can't move. And at some point, a very small point of light appears at the bottom of the cliff where it meets the desert floor. And that point of light starts moving upward. And as it moves up, the black of the cliff starts receding. It starts pulling to the side.
Wow.
But it's so really weird the way it separates. Imagine if you're in a theater and the curtain is closed,
Mm-hmm.
and they start to open the curtain from the bottom. This thing started to open from the bottom, and this point of light kept going up. And the edges that were opened, it looked sticky. If anyone is familiar, and I'm sorry for these descriptions, I know some of them are very vague, but if anyone is familiar with a novelty item called a lava lamp,
Mm-hmm.
inside of a lava lamp, there's this goo.
Oh, yeah, I know.
As the lamp heats up, once you turn it on,
Mm-hmm.
the goo starts to separate and kind of move around slowly. That's exactly what the edges of this black substance looked like as it started to move away on the face of this cliff. It pulled back in kind of globs. It was very gooey. And as this thing separated, it was like a zipper is unzipping, going straight up. The bottom never really moved apart very wide. And eventually, this thing unzipped all the way, almost all the way to the very top edge. And the shape of this, what looked like an opening now, it looked like a candle flame. It was this very acute arc, wider at the bottom, but it never did separate, really wide. There was a figure, I'll say humanoid, near the apex of the arc. And in this area that had opened up, this candle flame shaped area, it was all lit. It was lit a dirty orange color. I'll call it pumpkin, but it was all dirty orange. And I could see horizontal lines. There were 4 of them that appeared to divide this opened space into 3 separate spaces. So they appeared to be the edges of floors where they abutted this clear side that had opened up, this clear section. There were 2 lines for each, what I call floors, the edges of floors. And they were a dirty copper color, like a copper penny that's dulled. And then the light that was filling the spaces, it was a pumpkin, kind of an orange. And at the apex of the arc, where it was not very wide, there was a figure standing. It had its left side to me. It was looking down onto the surface of a very small structure in front of it. And it had 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and a head. But his torso looked like a bean. It looked like a lima bean. It was kind of arched forward, looking down. The legs were very thin, but the feet were very large. The legs were very short, and the feet were very large, long. The head was very unusual. The actual face portion, which I could not see because I was looking at it from the left side, and it was looking down, but the face portion looked kind of small, and then the head splayed much more broad. It looked like a comet. The face was kind of the small part, and then as the head went back, it was very long. It became wider, like the tail of a comet. Very, very long head, and the back of it looked like a meat tenderizing hammer, the face of a meat tenderizing hammer. It had all of these points on the back surface of this long stretch of head. I don't remember it moving. It was just looking down at this thing in front of it. And then my next realization is there is someone standing in front of me. Actually, there are 3 of them. There's one in the middle. There are 2 on either sides. The one in the middle is as big as I am, maybe a little bit bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot see its face because I am looking into the light. As this opening got higher, eventually the light came over me, the light from this thing. So I'm looking into the light. This thing is in front of me. It's very close, but its face is dark. It has arms. It has its arms at its side, and we just appear to be staring at each other. We're almost face to face. The 2 on either side, one on either side of it, they are small, and they are standing behind it partially, and they are moving in a very animated fashion, as we would imagine children who are very curious, wanting to look at something. They never moved out from behind it, but the tops of their torsos and heads did. They just were very animated. And then back close to the cliff face, there is another figure, like the small ones that are right in front of me. But this one is moving along the face of the cliff from my left to my right. It's just moving along. I don't know what it's doing. I can't describe exactly how it was moving, but I saw that this figure was there, and it was moving along. The shapes of the heads on these things in front of me were like a chicken egg, but inverted, where the pointed part of the egg is the chin, and the more domed part of the egg is the top of the head. All 3 of those heads were identical. The 2 smaller ones were just smaller. So that is happening. And I'm trying to... There was something out to my left on the desert floor in the light, just out of the light, but I could see it. I couldn't move, so I couldn't detect what it was, but I could see it in the periphery of my view, and it was quite large. And I don't know what it was, but there was something out there also. And I don't remember, as I turned the car and drove along the face of this thing, I don't ever remember passing something large. I do remember there were some plants on the desert, and there were some rocky features, so I don't know what that thing was out there. And then my next realization is I'm in my car. We're driving along, and I am aware of my passenger. Um, she is not in the position that I remember her being in. Um, and she's not moving. Uh, about an hour, I'll say, goes by, quite a bit of time goes by, and she finally wakes up.
Hmm.
I think she's just been asleep, in a very deep sleep at this point. But she wakes up. Uh, she had been sleeping up against the door, but when I regain an awareness of her in the car, she's folded forward, face down between her knees, which is not a way that she would ever sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Finally comes to, she sits up. I remember she put her hands up into her hair as she sat up and moved her hair out of her face, and she fell back against the car door. And she looked at me, and then she looked forward, and she did that several times. And I kept looking where I was going and looking at her, and I could tell something was wrong with her. Something was very wrong with her. And she finally, as I'm looking and driving, once she got up, I just start telling her about all this bizarre stuff that's happened. And I was talking very, very rapidly. It was very scattershot. It didn't make much sense. And I could
But
tell.
you remembered it.
Yes.
You didn't need hypnosis for any of this. You remembered it all.
Yes. And I could tell something was wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she sat up and I looked at her, I could tell something was wrong with her.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just chattering. She's looking around, and it took her several minutes before she said anything. And the first words out of her mouth, she looked at me and she said, "You're so weird." And I just continued telling her all this stuff. And at some point, she seemed to regain her senses. She seemed to kind of come around. And she then started rebutting everything I was saying. She said, "No, you haven't slept all night. You're just very tired.
Yeah.
You just had some kind
That's
of a
very typical.
while you were driving." So I kept trying to explain this to her, and she wouldn't believe it. So at some point, I just gave up. I said, "Okay." And then we drove to the mountain, drove through Bishop, California, drove up to the mountain, made contact with her boyfriend, who I was taking her to see, and we were all going to ski together. The odd thing is, I remember when we arrived in Mammoth Village, just before we got to his cabin, it was about noon. In fact, it was just after lunchtime. Normally, in all the years that I went up there skiing, we would arrive about 8:30 in the morning. So this was very odd that we were hours and hours late, because we had not encountered any roads covered by snow.
Mm-hmm.
We had not encountered any traffic. It should have been a very speedy, normal trek, but it was not. We got there well after lunchtime. We made contact with her boyfriend. He said that the lifts weren't operating because the snow depth was so deep. So we hopped in the car. We drove up to the lodge to just see how deep the snow was, and it was over the roof of the lodge, and all of the ski lifts were buried. All of the towers were buried. So wow. you couldn't ski. So we went and had lunch, and I think we must have just gone back to the cabin. The odd thing is, once we made contact with him, once we got to him, I had forgotten everything that I have just told you. I forgot all of it. And it was not until, I believe, 2015 at a support group meeting for experiencers, where someone in the group, actually a couple of the women in the group, were discussing white beings. And I had heard that term mentioned before, but I had really never listened too much, and the conversations were relatively short. This particular conversation in 2015 was more lengthy. And as these women discussed white beings, one of them said something that immediately
Triggered.
brought back the memory of those mummies along the road.
Mm.
And then that opened up the whole memory that I have just discussed. I remembered that whole trip and all of that stuff that had happened.
Wow. It doesn't work that way with dreams.
Well, yeah. This was interesting. This was
Wow.
Now the woman that was with me. She has remained a lifelong friend. I first met her in high school. She lives about a half an hour south of me. Very close friend. We have remained close friends all our lives. And as I was writing my manuscript, writing my book, I called her to ask her if she had any memory of that trip we took.
Sure.
I even remember what she was wearing on that trip. She did not have any memory of that trip. She remembered the clothing she was wearing. And she remembered that I did pick her up and take her on a trip to Mammoth to see her boyfriend to go skiing. Those aspects of this she does remember. But that particular trip, she has no details of that. But again, she was asleep when that violent impact occurred. And the long period of time where I have no memory of her being with me, and then she is with me, she has no memory of that either. So I believe we were separated, and then obviously put back in the car. I also believe that her postural change in the car, where she had been sleeping upright back against the door, and then my next realization is she is folded forward, asleep.
Yeah. The way they placed her in there.
I believe that she was placed back in the car in a position that was unlike the position that she had been in when she was removed.
Wow. Wow. Well, when I asked you to recount that story, I had no idea of what an amazing and strange encounter that was. But the thing about this experience at the visitors, I don't know that you've ever read Whitley Strieber's books or particularly the communion letters, but the high strangeness you're describing is very prevalent. It really is.
I, over the years, have through a support group with other experiencers, through talking to you, through watching your Breaking the Silence series, yes, I've come to realize that there are many people who share similar strange stories. And it seems that none of us really can come to a decisive conclusion why this is happening, or why is it, why it is happening to us, the individuals that are speaking about this.
Right.
I am certain there are many, many people who do not discuss this at all.
Oh, sure.
And
Millions.
live with this without sharing it.
Yeah.
And if any of those folks are are watching this right now, I would encourage you to confide in someone. And eventually, if you feel that you could share this publicly, please do.
Thank you, Joe.
The stigma that used to be attached to this, I have never actually understood. I don't have any reservations about discussing this with anyone that wants to talk about it. Although I am not in a sensitive employment position where this might affect my income. So that may be a difference between myself and some other folks.
Sure. Well, Joe, thank you so much for sharing this with us tonight. It was, I won't say it was unexpected, but it just, wow, fantastic. Just incredible. The detail and I could see it all. And I'm sure many people here could too, because we've all been there, but each one of us has a different mindset, a different reality, a different environment that we evolved through. And so I think that they're very keen on this, and they definitely orient how we visualize what's happening to us based on our particular mind.
And before I go,
sure.
I don't know how much time you have, but I'm looking at some of these comments.
We went a half hour over.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, don't be sorry.
Someone is asking, was the car damaged? No, there was no damage to the car. So again, strange, because the impact was, it was just incredibly violent. And as far as me running into the side of that thing, I was going very slow when I hit it. So there was no damage from me bumping into it. I've always thought that if there were indeed occupants in that thing that I was mistakenly identifying as a cliff, I believe that was the craft.
Yeah.
That was causing all the distress. And I believe it had been brought to the ground for reasons unknown to me.
Sure.
But I'm sure when I hit it, that had to have created some kind of noise inside of that thing. And right. I just imagine if humans were inside, I don't know what was inside of it, but I think it's kind of funny. They must have been going, can you believe that guy just hit us? That guy just ran right into us. You know what?
Well, you might have had damage, and they could have very easily repaired it.
I don't know. I'm sorry that I'm going to leave so many folks with questions. I wish I had a YouTube channel so that I could answer you all individually. I don't have a channel. I guess I could sign up for one. I've never looked at how that's done. But
well, we also have a community chat, and it'd be nice to have you in there, and then they could ask you a lot of questions.
I'd love to do that. You'll have to inform me when that occurs.
You bet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks again. It's been an incredible evening with Joe Stillwell, and wow, thank you.
Sorry for going so long. Thank you all.
No, please don't apologize, because everyone here really enjoyed it, and you could hear a pin drop there for a while. Usually they're chatting, and it just went silent.
Okay, good.
And we had a good turnout. So thank you so much, Joe.
You're welcome, Steve. Thank you for the time.
And we'll see you guys tomorrow for Ann Carter and her episode, and the pre-premiere an hour before that, which starts at 3:50. So again, Joe, thank you so much. It was really great to talk to you again.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye, everyone.